Hi you guys, thanks for joining me. My name is Jill if you don't know me, and I'm the homeschool mom to a fourth grader. Today I want to talk about problem-based learning, mainly because I don't actually see a lot of, actually any homeschool moms talking about PBLs. And in my opinion, coming from the workforce, they're incredibly important. So let's discuss it, because I found a few of them. I was actually more than a few. I was shocked to find just a treasure trove of them under Royal Fireworks Press, which many of you may recognize as the publisher for Michael Clay Thompson's books, and a lot of you guys use them. I like them, I'm interested in them. But if you go to the tab on the left side where it says curricula and you scroll down, you'll see problem-based learning units. And when that opens up, you'll find a whole host, 9 or 10 of them, of PBLs, all different, but all real world, either historical or current affairs type of thing, or science. The two that I picked specifically, I was looking for science, and I was also looking for something kind of like this, but I didn't know that this is what it was called, PBL. I had no idea. Live and learn. Probably you guys are all rolling your eyes because like, of course I knew what these were. But if you know what they are, then why are we not talking about them? When we get into the workforce, this is huge. If you can have your child work through one of these PBLs, you will have set them up for the beginning of major success when they get out into the workforce. I cannot stress how important it is to be able to solve an unknown problem, to be given essentially your division chief or your boss is going to come to you and dump a project on you and say, here, you need to figure this out. This is a nightmare. Okay, well, what is it? I don't know. That really does happen. So you take this package back and you think, okay, she must have given this to me because I am an expert in X, Y, and Z. So it must have something to do with X, Y, and Z. But I don't know the exact topic, and I don't know where the problem is within it. It could be you see problems, but is it systemic from a larger issue? Is it some type of symptom of a larger problem? And it's entirely up to you and or your team to figure it out. So the biggest question starts with, what's the problem? And sometimes it's not evident. These PBLs from Sheila Gallagher, it's not immediately evident what the issue is. And so for instance, the Plague one that I purchased for a single kid, it starts with learning about medieval towns, what a town looks like and how people act there and what was it like to live there. And it's not until the second day of this PBL that the child realizes, oh, there's something called the plague and it's coming to our town. The entire event takes place around the child as a stakeholder being placed in a position of authority over the town, and it's up to him or her, and probably a team if you have one, to determine, well, if this plague is coming, you can't stop it from coming, but we have time to try to mitigate some things and maybe create a safer environment so that when it arrives in town, we're not completely crushed by it. And if you haven't done these before, I would really encourage you to read in depth. These are not open and go. These are actually pretty complicated topics with pretty unusual things that I think a homeschool mom needs to do. Usually we're used to teaching, we're used to guiding, we're used to opening something and saying, this is how it is, and this, and this, and this is how you need to figure out the problem or whatever. But in this case, you are presenting a unit to the child as an experience and hey, check this out. And from there, you cannot teach. If you teach to the problem and feed the child information, it ceases to be a problem-based learning unit, and then they're not learning. The majority of the PBL is really geared and meant to be built around the child discovering for themselves, finding their own resources. Well, what are your resources? I don't know. Okay, well, let's see what the possibilities are. And then they've got 3 resources that they find. Okay, are there any more? Do you need any more? How do you implement these resources? What do you do now? What do you do now? Does this make sense? Do you think this is the actual problem? And then the PBL throws in what they call kickers, or what I would call wrench in the works. And you don't have to use them, but if you implement them into the PBL, it makes it more complicated, where the child is working towards this issue, for instance, with the plague. Okay, I think our town's ready. And then there's a notification of something else happening or something else going wrong. And now the mitigation that they have implemented to try to protect themselves from the plague may or may not work, and do they need to rethink it? And so there is purposefully built in frustration for the child. Why? Because that really does happen. And honestly, if you are not comfortable being uncomfortable, allowing your child to explore, to be frustrated, to move slowly in some cases, if you're uncomfortable with that, you really need to get to a place where you can handle the PBL yourself, because you have to let them do it. Now, you can kind of bat it back and forth, you know, like your cat does, of kind of keep them where they're supposed to be. But in my case, I don't think I'm going to do that. I bought one. The other one is the black-footed ferret, where Morgan plays a biologist, and she has the difficulty of determining how to reintegrate black-footed ferrets into an area outside Fort Collins, Colorado. So these are real world things, and Morgan is a real type of, no kidding, not imaginary scientist. And it starts off with a memo from your boss saying, I know you can do this, figure out X, Y, and Z. And so Morgan will be left there going, oh, what do I do? How do I do that? So there are things that are injected into the problem. For instance, there's newspaper clippings, and some of the newspaper may or may not be applicable to the unit, or maybe it is, but it's not initially apparent, and they might gloss over some of those articles, and then later on they realize, oh wait, ranchers and cows really are important to the black-footed ferret issue. Didn't I read something like that? Oh, that was in the article. Now they got to go back to the article and reread it, because now it's suddenly more important in their problem. I love this, you guys. I love the idea of doing PBLs. In my opinion, if you did 90% PBLs in your homeschool, your kid would totally be ready for the workforce and probably be able to make 6 figures. I just really think that this is a skill that is, it shows that the person is independent, they're resourceful, they can handle murky situations, they can be calm in the chaos. All of these things, if they can show that they can manage and handle projects, and on top of that, even within a deadline, calmly and reaching out and getting their own resources, I would totally hire that kid. Totally. Now, I know I've got my own idea of what a PBL is because I did some of them in my work. But if you're unsure and you don't know where to start, Sheila Gallagher does have a book, and it's sort of a how-to and a background and where it has started, where the PBL started and why. And I would really encourage, you don't have to buy that book. I'm not representing one over the other, but it was what I did to say to myself, all right, this is a PBL for me. I don't know what I'm doing here with regards to teaching one to Morgan. I need to do a little bit of research and figure out how it is that I can help her and how I can role play with her so that she's successful in this. And I just found it's a really quick book. It's really short, and it was easy for me to understand what role I was going to play with Morgan when she starts in the 5th grade with PBLs. And I have the two. What I think I'm going to do is the plague unit first, and then the black-footed ferret, because if you see on their website, the units are from 5th grade to 12th grade, but some are for 5th to 9th, which I think the plague is, and then the black-footed ferret is for a little bit older child. And it does entail more details, and it's a bit more complicated. So I'm going to hold that until the second half of the 5th grade, and we'll do the plague the first half of the 5th grade. And it fits in really well with our own curriculum, what we're doing next year, because we're doing Story of the World Part 2, which is the medieval times. And it just goes really great. These PBLs start around the 5th grade. Some are just wonderful. There's one about the 1961, I think, debate between Nixon and Kennedy. Kennedy won that debate, but the child plays a person on Nixon's team to then troubleshoot how they should have won or could have won. That also involves you watching the no kidding debate between Kennedy and Nixon back then. And it's kind of neat because you can see, oh, well, maybe he should have done that and he should have done this, which is, hindsight's 20/20. But what did Kennedy bring that Nixon didn't, that now, as if you're their program manager or their campaign manager, what is it that you can do to revamp Nixon's campaign so that maybe he would win as opposed to Kennedy? And so these are, no kidding, real world issues, and it brings up many, many types of conversation. The black-footed ferret unit study brings in a lot of geography, some ferret math, which is really interesting because ferrets need at least 100 prairie dogs a year to consume to stay alive. And so how many prairie dogs are there per 10 acres, which means you can only integrate or reintroduce so many ferrets per 100 prairie dogs. But the farmers want to kill all the prairie dogs because they find them annoying and they think that they're a danger. So there's all these problems and things that kind of come in to the story of the black-footed ferret and how your child, as the biologist, is supposed to save the day or solve the problem. I would also encourage, I think when I do this with Morgan, is to tell her that sometimes there is no good answer. Sometimes when you do a project, you are in damage control and your success is based off of, you have 3 bad options, which one is the best one out of the lot that you should take as opposed to another. There is one thing that I do take issue with this, and I think that it's kind of a bleed over from the problem-based units. They sell them for schools, but then they also sell them for homeschools. And one of the things is the assessment rubric, and I just don't think that it's necessary. Expectations and behavior expectations, and I suppose that I don't have to talk about behavior expectations with my kid because we get along just fine and she's just the one. But I can imagine that if I had 2 or 3 children, every kid you add on is exponentially more complicated. And then if they're in a group, you're also doing storming, norming, forming, where everybody's kind of jockeying or vying for this type and this part of the project. One person is talking more than the other. And so I can understand setting up, I think, expectations in advance. But what I don't like is, I just don't need it. What I want for Morgan is for her to sit down and do a self-assessment, maybe not at the end of the day, maybe in the morning, after she looks at her whiteboard or her cork board or whatever it is. And that's another thing that's important for PBLs is I think children, anybody doing a PBL, anybody on a big project is going to need a whole wall. Kind of like, when you see the detective movies and they come back from the crime scene and they start pinning things up on the wall and drawing lines and kind of suppositions and maybe possible conclusions. That is what the child is going to need. But I also would encourage you not to set that up for your kid either. 2 reasons. 1, it's their work to do. And 2, from my experience, a person's work board on their wall is incredibly personal. So how the child views a certain thing and where that means it should go on the wall is incredibly important for them to be able to, that's what's coming out of their minds and their brains. And we should allow them to choose how it's going to be presented on the board. It doesn't have to make sense to us. It totally doesn't have to make sense to us. But I would encourage Morgan, for instance, if we have a cork board, probably a whiteboard because stickies stick on whiteboards better. They fall off a cork. I found that using stickies instead of just writing on the board really helps if you need to take something off and move it somewhere else, because it is a visual thing and some things will move without changing, and so you have to take that unchanging sticky note but move it to another location on the problem board. And these are all tactics and techniques that you can Google. Maybe you have many of them on your own, or that you have created already based off of your own past or current career. As far as I'm concerned, I'd like to do 1 or 2 of these a year, and that would mean really moving everything out of its path while we do it, treating it like a no kidding full day's work, exactly like a project that you would. You come in your work day, you work on your project all day, you get really sick of looking at it, it's time to go home for dinner, and you leave, and then you come back and you pick it up and you work on it until that project is done. That's what you do at work. And so I think that that's what we're going to do, is when we do these, we're going to drop everything that we can throughout the day, to include math, to include journaling, everything that we do on a normally daily basis, except for walking in the morning, and spend all day with that PBL. Oh, and there was one other thing that I wanted to do. For the black-footed ferret one, because the plague is kind of hard to do because it's in old-timey, it's way back in the day, so they didn't have email. But for the black-footed ferret one, the parent could play a fellow biologist having a similar problem in New Mexico as opposed to Colorado, and your son or daughter could email their colleague, which is actually you. You could develop your own email address and you could correspond that way, because then there would be that annoying but necessary lag time. It wouldn't be, the child would not get an immediate response of, oh, where's my colleague hasn't emailed me a response yet. How often have we been waiting for a specific email? And so it's real world in that they're waiting for that email ping, and maybe it comes up at 7 o'clock at night, you know, after dinner or whatever. And then your kid can see, oh, look, so-and-so has written back to me. All right, well, what did he or she write? Ah, okay, well, what are you going to do? You want to do something with your whiteboard or any of your stickies today, or any pre-planning for tomorrow based off of that email, or leave it in the morning and let them just sort of nosh on it at night and think about it. And so that's how we're going to do it. That's the plan anyway. I hadn't had these in my 2024-2025 curriculum picks because I wasn't aware of them at the time, and I stumbled upon them. And honestly, I can just I can grab one of these and say, you know what, it's unit study time, and here's the Ferret Ecology. It's unit study time. Let's do this one. And we'll spend, I don't know, a full week just doing it, or if we do half days, 2-3 weeks, whatever. I'm not going to put a timeline on it. So if Morgan is not done, she's not done. And we'll just keep rolling until she's finished. So I find that if I put a timeline on stuff for Morgan, and that generally gums it up. I screw it up by putting my own sense of time on it. I will allow her to develop her own sense of urgency over the problem, and there are things that you can interject that the problem study helps you do to keep the ball rolling and to keep the project going without it appearing as if you're dabbling in it. I would envision that between Morgan's enthusiasm over it and the role playing and those things being interjected to keep things moving, I think that that's enough. I don't think I need a timeline on that, beyond that, or a deadline. All right, that's it for me. See you guys.